So, as you probably know by now, Square Enix put on a 14-hour live stream last weekend to talk about Final Fantasy XIV. And during those 14 hours, the part of the live stream that seemed to make Yoshi-P the most visually uncomfortable was when somebody asked him about add ons. And he kind of had this look to his face where he's like, oh my god. This question again. Are we really gonna talk about this again? Are we really gonna bring up add ons and you're gonna have me talk about add ons again? And he looked kind of annoyed. And of course, he went ahead and he answered that question. And so, what I have in front of me here is the loose translation of his answer. And so, I'm going to read it out loud to you. And what Yoshi-P said is, if you are to ask me if I would go my way to crack down on third-party sites that upload everyone's data, it's obvious that he mentions FF logs in this case. Well, I am aware of how much of a nuisance that site has caused, having to see the numbers we don't want to see that are normally not displayed in the game and then get told about it. This is something we have to keep fighting with, and that could end up really unhealthy, I think. Of course, if we could squash them for causing such trouble, we would have done it. Okay, I do not envy Yoshi-P. Yoshi-P is not in an enviable position, right? And Yoshi-P himself says about himself that he is a greedy person. And what he means when he says that is that he wants all the types of players. He wants the role players. He wants the people who play for story. He wants the hardcore raiders. He wants the people who like to do housing. He wants them all. And he's so good at getting them all that he finds himself in this situation where if he answers a question like this, there's no real way for him to answer this question directly without pissing off half of the players. No matter what he says about FF logs and add-ons, but in particular, for the sake of this video, FF logs, some people are going to be mad and some people are going to be happy. And so he answered it to the best of his ability. And when it comes to this particular discussion, you can really take a look at players and place them into two camps. On one end, you have the experience-driven players. These are people who are about the journey and not the destination. And I myself typically play video games in this way. Now, the other type of player is the result-driven player, where the destination is more important than the journey, and it doesn't matter as much what they have to do to win as long as they win, right? And me, myself, personally, I am one or the other depending on what the activity is in my life. For example, when I was in high school and college, I was really into bodybuilding as a hobbyist. And, it didn't matter to me what split I had to do, how long I had to be in the gym, what I had to eat, how I had to. Nothing mattered as much as getting the results that I wanted, And I got the most fulfillment out of activity, the better and better I got at it, regardless of what I actually had to do. Some people play video games like that. I'm not one of them, but I definitely understand, this perspective. And so both of these types of players, will kind of look at the parsing problem or the parsing topic from different perspectives. Someone who is a bit more experience driven, like myself, might think about parsing in this way. They might say something like, well, what the parsers do is they unnecessarily gatekeep. And they create this catch-22 situation where you can't raid unless you get good parses, and you can't get good parses unless you raid. So they're gatekeeping, and they're being elitist and toxic, and, they're not creating a fun game experience. Whereas the more results-driven players might take a look at the experience-driven players and say something like, oh, well, you don't like parsing because you want to get carried and you want us to do all the hard work and you want to just be able to get by. And they might look at Yoshi-P and say the same thing about him. They might look at Yoshi-P and say, well, he's so against parsing because he wants to coddle the player base. And, he doesn't want anyone to call anyone out so it doesn't hurt their feelings. And, depending on the perspective you take, there is some truth and some falsehood to both of these takes, right? The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. And as usual, the internet typically doesn't do well with nuance. So the way that Yoshi-P went ahead and managed it, the way Yoshi-P went ahead and answered this question, and the way he kind of, handles the add-on slash FF logs topic is interesting to discuss in the context of his main competitor, which of course is World of Warcraft, right? Because the way that the WoW devs and the WoW team went ahead and handled this topic and handled this issue with their game is almost directly in opposition with how Yoshi-P handles it. And the way that the WoW devs do it is they're very data driven, they're analytics driven, and it seems like for a while they thought that engagement equals fun, or the longer that people play equals good game, right? They're focused on data. They don't seem to be as privy to the actual player experience as they are to their numbers. Their numbers, their own, internal parses for their business, right? And so they seem to take a look at the numbers and be like, okay, who plays our game the most? It's the hardcore players, of course. They spend the most time. They sub for the longest. They, buy the 6-month subs. And so what did Blizzard end up doing? In many ways, they ended up designing their game for their hardest core players because they're, some of the most vocal players and also the most engaged players, And the hardest core players are typically results-driven players. And so then they ended up designing the game in a way that is all about results. It's about getting your eye level up. That's a, result, not an experience. It's about pushing your key, a result, not an experience. Getting cutting edge, getting a parse. And the more and more that Blizzard and the WoW team designed the game like that, the more they turned off the average player, the experience-driven player, and they really shot themselves in the foot because a vast majority of players are these experience-driven players, including myself. And so, it seems like now with Dragonflight, they're trying to backpedal and bring back a lot of these players. And they mismanaged their game where they kind of chose one over the other. They chose to cater to the results-driven players at the expense of the experience-driven players. Yoshi-P is not trying to do that. Yoshi-P's way of handling the situation, which is more or less turning a blind eye and saying, I know this exists. I know add-ons exists, but I'm not going to crack down on it. It's against TOS. You're not allowed to talk about it. You shouldn't talk about it. And he built this social situation where it is the status quo not to talk about add-ons or parsing. And what that does is it creates a situation where the majority of experience-driven players can go in and they can play the game without having to worry about parses, worry about damage meters or anything like that. Because even if people in their party are using them, they're not going to hear about it, And simultaneously, the more results-driven players can go ahead and engage in those and have their fun and get their parses and be results-driven, which they want to be because that's how they have the most fun. They can do that, and then they can discuss on Discord, etc., etc. And this is why I think Yoshi-P looked so visually uncomfortable answering this question because he doesn't want to take away the fun from the results-driven players. He doesn't want to, but he does understand how this type of gameplay and mentality can impose on people who have fun in a different way, who have fun, going through it as a journey more than a destination. And when it comes to add-ons in particular, the reason why he also kind of has to implement the things that he has is because he doesn't really want to have to go ahead and invade privacy, because a lot of the third-party add-ons used for Final Fantasy XIV are add-ons that are kind of overlays onto the game and that are third-party programs that aren't part of the game's code. And so the only way that Yoshi-P would be able to detect them is to create software and put software into Final Fantasy XIV that then scans all of the processes and all of the programs running on your computer outside of the game, So, for example, if you have, Google Chrome open, then Yoshi-P, if he did implement a way into the game to detect add-ons and third-party tools would be able to see, okay, look, they have Chrome open, or they have PowerPoint open, or whatever it may be, and that's not something he wants to do. It would also make the game a lot harder to run. Thus, it would raise the barrier to entry of the type of hardware that can play the game. He doesn't want to do that. He wants to make sure everyone has fun, and he doesn't want anyone else to impose on anybody else's fun. And his way of going about it seems to be the best way to do it. And if I were in his shoes, I would do it that way too. And that's all I had to say for this video. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.